What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Sleeping with the Numbers podcast. My name is Pat, and I'll be doing the injury report episode for you guys. The current recording time is 11:40 a.m. Central on October 1st, so all injury news will be up to that point. Unfortunately, we are without Dylan today. We're also without our licensed physical therapist, Alex Baxter. So unlike Mr. Baxter, I do not have my license to touch people, so therefore I cannot give you the expert opinions that he can, but we're looking forward to having him back next week. Before we get into the injuries, let's look at the last night's game. The Bengals beat the Jags 24-21. Trevor Lawrence sucks. Let's just say it. He'll get better eventually, but right now I would not touch him in any terms of bets or fantasy or anything. Outside of James Robinson, I wouldn't really use any of the Jaguars anyways. Joe Burrow had another good game, 348 yards and 2 touchdowns. Joe Mixon did well. He had a touchdown. And Tyler Boyd had 9 catches for 118 yards. Our first game that we're going to look at for the injury report is the Chiefs at the Eagles. Rashad Fenton did not play in practice. He has a concussion. Orlando Brown, Frank Clark, and Chris Jones were limited. And then McCole Hardman and Tyreek Hill were full participants. To me, I would really be hesitant about starting Tyreek Hill. Not necessarily because he has a rib injury and that he did practice, but the main concern is that he just hasn't been really good in fantasy the past few weeks. So until that changes, I'm not really looking to start him unless he's your true number one and you don't really have any other options. For the Eagles, Jordan Mailata was the only key player who did not practice. Landon Dickerson, Lane Johnson, and Jason Kelce were all limited. So for the Eagles, not really a big change from last week. The next game, the Giants and the Saints. Giants are a bit of a pickle. Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton both had issues. Sterling Shepard has a hamstring injury, as well as Darius Slayton. He also has a hamstring injury. And I think what I'm really concerned for the Giants is even if one or neither of these guys plays, is I'm not touching Daniel Jones at all because Sterling Shepard listed as questionable. John Ross, he's been on the IR. Kenny Golladay, questionable. Saquon Barkley, questionable. Darius Slayton, questionable. There's nobody on the Giants offense. Now, John Ross is projected to be activated from the IR, but I'm not going to put him into fantasy or assume that he's going to have a great game if I'm starting Daniel Jones because there's literally nobody else outside of Evan Ingram. We did see that Saquon had a good game, so hopefully that him being questionable for practice is not a huge issue and that he will start. And if that's the case, then he should have a really good game because when your top two wide receivers are out, that usually puts a lot of more opportunity in the running back's hands. For the Saints, they had center Eric McCoy. He has a calf injury. He missed practice, and Terron Armstead, he missed practice with an elbow injury. Jameis Winston and Marshawn Lattimore are both full participants, so for me, I'm not really too worried about the Saints. Nothing really sticking out there in terms of concerns for bets or for fantasy. The next game will be the Titans at the Jets. A.J. Brown and Julio Jones both have hamstring injuries. Bud Dupree has a knee injury, and he did not practice as of Wednesday. The current report right now is that both Browns and Jones could miss the game on Sunday, so if that's the case, I would be really hesitant to play Ryan Tannehill at all. But I would definitely play Derrick Henry, not because he's not only the best running back right now in terms of fantasy usage, but I think that if neither Julio or AJ are going to play, it's going to be a really good opportunity for him to get a lot of runs against a really bad Jets team. For the Jets, Elijah Moore has a concussion. He was held out of practice. Receiver Jamison Crowder has a groin injury, and Tyler Kroft has a rib injury. Both of them were limited. I think for me, I'm not touching anybody on the Jets regardless of the injury status because it's just been a train wreck for them. And I think that eventually things will kind of even out for them a little bit, but I'm not really going to put my money on it. Next game we have are the Panthers and the Cowboys. Christian McCaffrey did not practice, but we kind of expected that. He's supposed to be out for a few weeks. So Chuba Hubbard's still your go-to guy if you want to consider him that. Defensive end, Yetur Gross-Matos has an ankle injury. John Miller with shoulder injury. They were both limited in practice. C.J. Henderson, who the Panthers just acquired for in a trade, is also listed on the injury report, but he was a full participant, so he should be good to go. For the Cowboys, Dorrance Armstrong, Carlos Watkins, Donovan Wilson, and Ty Nsekhe did not practice. I'm not super concerned for the Cowboys. I think that they looked pretty good last week, so I think I'm not really going to worry about anybody in terms of fantasy or betting. What I would say is that I think now everybody's starting to realize that Zeke wasn't really, the number 2 running back in this situation. I think that it was sort of a fluke, and I think he'll kind of come back to life. Next game that we're going to look at are the Texans and the Bills. Bills safety Jordan Poyer is the only person who didn't practice. John Feliciano, Micah Hyde, and Taron Johnson were limited. For the Texans, I don't really see anybody who's a new list on the injury report. We know that Tyrod's been out. We know that Kamai Fairbairn, the kicker, who's been out, he could come back this week against the Bills. We'll find out for sure. But regardless, that doesn't change the way that I look at the Texans for fantasy or for betting. Next on the list, we have the Lions and the Bears. For the Bears, I'm a little concerned about the quarterback situation. Andy Dalton listed as questionable. He's a limited participant in practice. If he's available, I think that the Bears should start him over Justin Fields. I don't think Justin's ready. And if that's the case, that gives me a little bit higher hopes of playing Allen Robinson or Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney's also limited in practice on Thursday, so if he's out, hopefully Allen Robinson gets a little bit higher of a target share. But either way, I'm kind of concerned for the Bears offense if Dalton does not play this week. As for Detroit, DeAndre Swift is really the only person relevant who was limited in practice. However, he's kind of had an injury designation all season, so I wouldn't be super concerned at this point in time, but I would definitely keep my eyes on things, because if he's out and Jamal Williams is on your team or available, I would definitely put him in, because I think that Jamal will have a great game against the Bears. Next on the list, we have the Browns and the Vikings. The Browns' offensive line was a little banged up. J.C. Treader and Jedrick Willis Jr. did not practice. Greg Newsome, Jack Conklin, and Chris Hubbard were limited, as well as Odell Beckham. I would be really concerned with anything involving Baker at this point in time, because we saw the Vikings have a pretty good team. I mean, defensively, they're not super stout, but if Baker's missing two of his offensive linemen, I'd be a little bit concerned that he's going to get pressured a lot. So keep an eye on that. As for the Vikings, they have 15 players on the report. Really, the big people that we should talk about, Dalvin Cook was out last week. Alexander Mattison did a pretty good job, but obviously Dalvin's the number one there. So keep an eye. I don't think Dalvin's going to play this week, so we'll find out. In terms of Eric Hendricks and Anthony Barr, they were also limited in tackle. Christian Darrisaw was a full participant for the first time, so if he goes to the Vikings line, that would be nice to see. Not really sure how much he's going to play, being that he's a rookie. He hasn't really been available all year, but it would be good for him to at least start becoming available. Up next, we have the Colts and the Dolphins. For the Colts, they had 9 players who were held out of practice, including Darius Leonard and Quentin Nelson. Quentin Nelson was determined to not play this week by Coach Frank Reich, so that's interesting. Jonathan Taylor, Carson Wentz were both limited in practice. I think what we've seen from the Colts this year, I'm not playing any of them for fantasy at this point in time until they get that figured out, because right now it seems like the offense is a little out of whack. It seems like, you can play Michael Pittman and be okay, but outside of him, it's kind of a toss-up. Jonathan Taylor really hasn't done anything, and Carson Wentz hasn't looked very good either. For the Dolphins, the only player who did not practice was Will Fuller. I wouldn't play him anyways with Jacoby in, so I'm not really super concerned about that. So I think for me, Miami should be fairly healthy, but I don't think it's going to matter, because I think this is going to be a stinker of a game, so who knows who's going to win this one. I wouldn't touch any of these teams in terms of betting or fantasy. Next up, we have Washington and Atlanta. Brandon Scherff and Benjamin St-Juste were the only players for Washington that were held out on Wednesday, so keep an eye on that. For the Falcons, Russell Gage and Marlon Davidson did not participate, so keep an eye on them. I wouldn't play Russell Gage anyways. It seems like the Falcons' offense has kind of been a disappointment as well in terms of wide receivers. Calvin Ridley hasn't done too much. Kyle Pitts hasn't done too much, so we're just going to keep an eye on for them, but outside of that, I really wouldn't worry about anything with the Falcons. I think they're going to get blown out by Washington. So hopefully Taylor Heineke has another good game, and hopefully Washington, can beat the -1.5 spread that I'm seeing right now, which is kind of absurd to me, but, that's just my opinion. Probably one of the better games this week, Cardinals and Rams. DeAndre Hopkins did not practice on Wednesday. He did play against Jacksonville, so it's assumed that he's being held out for precautionary measures. If he does not play, then pick your choosing between Rondale Moore, Christian Kirk, AJ Green. Any one of those guys should get a lot of targets. I think the Cardinals should throw a lot against the Rams, and I think it's going to be a pretty good game, like I said. For the Rams, Darrell Henderson did not practice. We're not sure if he's going to play. Sean McVay thinks he will, but if he does not, would really consider looking at Sony Michel. He did pretty decent for, his first start of the year last week. Especially against the Cardinals, who have been kind of surprising in terms of their defense, giving up more than what I've expected. So I would play either of those running backs if they're available, but we're really hoping Darrell Henderson comes back, and he's been pretty solid for most fantasy teams, or if you do DFS or anything like that. So I would definitely keep an eye out for him. Another NFC West matchup, we have the Seahawks and the Niners. For the Seahawks, kind of looking around, Rashad Penny's didn't practice, Brandon Shell didn't practice, Tyler Lockett was limited. So for me, if Tyler Lockett is hurt, then really look out for DK Metcalf to have more targets. For the 49ers, George Kittle, Josh Norman, they did not practice, so we're going to keep an eye out for them because if George Kittle does not play, that is a little bit more of a concern, but that also throws more targets towards Debo's way or Brandon Ayuk, depending on who you have on your team. Brandon Ayuk last week looked pretty solid, so if you're doing DFS, he might be a little bit cheaper than Debo, and it might be just as good of a game for him. We've also seen that Seattle's defense isn't as good as what we thought it was going to be. Another guy for the 49ers who's not highlighted but should be noted is that Elijah Mitchell. He was limited at Thursday's practice. If he comes back, that's really going to screw up that backfield because now you're going to have several guys to pick from. Coming up for AFC North versus the AFC West matchup, the Ravens and the Broncos. 8 Ravens missed practice, including Lamar Jackson, Alejandro Villanueva, Ronnie Stanley. I would be really concerned about that. Lamar Jackson's dealing with a back injury, so hopefully he can play. If he does not play, that makes Denver the favorite, in my opinion. It says that he did practice on Friday, so I would just be curious to see if that back injury is going to cause him any issues during the game. For the Broncos, Graham Glasgow, Dalton Risner, and Melvin Gordon were all limited in practice. Gordon had a pretty solid game, and what we've seen from the Ravens defense is that they are good but not great. So Melvin Gordon could have a pretty good game here. He remained limited for Thursday, so we'll have to keep an eye out for him and see what really happens. As like we said, a lot of the receivers for the Broncos are on IR right now, including Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler. So outside of Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick, they kind of have to go through Melvin Gordon because no offense, he's a glass house, so he's probably going to get hurt this week anyways, and we'll talk about him next week. Next game, Steelers and Packers. Ben Roethlisberger did not practice, but that's typical for him. He usually has a day off. Juju and Chukwuma Okorafor didn't practice either. TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith were limited. Receiver Deontay Johnson was also limited. I'd be really concerned if Juju and Deontay still have lingering injuries going into this weekend because I don't have faith that Najee's going to do anything. I think that it's not necessarily his fault. Our offensive line is terrible, so I would be really concerned if he doesn't do very well. And if Ben doesn't really have any options to throw to outside of Chase Claypool. So keep an eye out for that. Keep an eye out for TJ and Alex Highsmith. If we can't put pressure on Aaron Rodgers, it's going to be a real problem. And finally, coming back is Zach Banner, which is good because, like I said, the offensive line stinks. Zach Banner's, to me, he can be definitely put in there, and he could be a starter within the next few weeks. For the Packers, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Josh Myers, and Kevin King were among the ones who didn't practice on Wednesday. Aaron Jones was limited, so keep an eye out for that. I don't think that that's really going to affect Aaron Jones' availability for this week, so I hope that that's not the case. If he does play against the Steelers, expect him to do really well. Expect really everybody from the Packers to probably do well because the Steelers defense has been kind of porous in the past few weeks. Probably the most hyped up matchup for this week, the Buccaneers and Patriots. Rob Gronkowski, Jason Pierre-Paul, and Giovanni Bernard were held out of practice. Of those three, I'm really concerned about Gronk, obviously because he's a touchdown machine. But however, he's not expected to miss Sunday's game, but I would just keep an eye out for that because if he is hurt and the Buccaneers go up early on the Patriots, he may not play at all. So for fantasy, I may or may not start Gronk right away. We did learn that Chris Godwin was a full participant, so that's good. As for the Patriots, James White went to the IR, so look for Damian Harris to get a little bit more of a target share. I'm not playing him because it seems like the Bucs have a pretty good run defense, but their pass defense is pretty bad. So if you have Nelson Aguilar or Jacoby Myers, I would really look to consider starting one of those two if you have to. I don't necessarily think the Patriots are going to win. I don't think Mac's going to have a really great game, not because he's not a good quarterback, but because I think that the Buccaneers are just that much better. Last game, Monday night, Raiders and Chargers. Josh Jacobs was limited in practice. I would be surprised if he came in and had a high usage amount with the way that Peyton Barber played. If he does play, he's going to get some red zone carries, so consider that. But I would definitely not worry about him for fantasy at all. I don't think it's necessary, especially because he's the Monday night game. You don't want to wait until Monday and bank on a guy coming in and then just to find out that you were going to play him and he ends up being hurt anyways. So that's really going to screw up your team if you're doing fantasy or DFS. So avoid Josh Jacobs if you can. For the Chargers, Keenan Allen was limited. Not necessarily concerned about him because he's been pretty relevant this entire fantasy season. Derwin James and Chris Harris were also limited in practice. So I think for me, I think it's going to be a good game. I think it'll probably be closer than what people think. I think people want to assume that the Raiders are kind of like a fluke almost, but I don't necessarily know if that's going to be true. I think that the Chargers should win, but it could be a pretty exciting Monday night game. So that concludes it for the injury report. If there's anything that's major that comes out, we'll be sure to post it on our social media where you can find us on Sleeping with the Numbers at Instagram, Sleeping with the Numbers at TikTok. We also do at SWTN Podcast for Twitter. And then for this weekend's game, check out Monkey Knife Fight. You can find the link in our social, and you can find the link on YouTube as well. Monkey Knife Fight is a DFS style platform. We really enjoy it. They have a lot of cool prop bets that you can go through, and if you sign up through our link, you can help start an account and really support the show that way. Another way to help support the show is through ordering a subscription from BarkBox. That link will also be posted on our socials and in this YouTube video as well. BarkBox is great because it's a subscription service that they provide dog treats and dog toys on a monthly basis. All comes in a nice theme box, and it's super high quality. If you know anything about dog training, they always talk about high value treats. And for me, I like getting them versus going to just like a place like a Target or something like that, because I think for the price that you're paying, you're getting a very, very good type of jerky or a very good type of chew for a pretty reasonable price. And when you sign up through us, you get a month for free. So at the end of the day, I think it's a pretty solid deal. I use it with my dog, and she loves it. You'll probably have seen us on TikTok, and she just can't handle sometimes waiting for me to give her a treat. So I would really encourage you to check out BarkBox. I've been very happy with their service so far. Well, that's going to conclude it for us. Like I said, we'll keep you posted if anything major breaks out. But other than that, we will see you next time on Sleeping with the Numbers.